Hello and welcome. I am so glad that you have joined me today. We're continuing in our study of the book of Judges. We're up to Judges chapter 17 today. So grab yourself a cuppa and we'll get started. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I look forward to reading some of your comments. So Judges chapter 17 today, it starts a new direction in the book of Judges. We'll no longer see any God-appointed judges, and some commentators have believed that this part of the book is written by a different author because it's got a slightly different nature. So we've got a shift here. The last 14 chapters we've studied, they look at the lives of the 12 different God-appointed judges in Israel. But Israel now, they've failed to escape that cycle of sin, and they no longer call out to the Lord, and God no longer is sending judges. But God's nature does not change. He still is gracious, and he still desires that all should be saved. We see this in 2 Peter 3 verse 9. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promises, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everybody to come to repentance. So let's look at this. Verse 1. Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it. Then his mother said, the Lord bless you, my son. Now, we've been introduced to a character called Micah. He's from Ephraim. And this Micah is not to be confused with Micah the prophet, who lived a couple of hundred years after this time. Micah has stolen 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother, and he heard her offer a curse, and is now returning the property. Firstly, how much is this silver worth? So a shekel was first a unit of weight, and then later becomes a unit of currency in Judea. In the New Testament times, it is currency, but here in the Old Testament, it's a measure of weight. So Micah stole 1,100 shekels of silver from his mother, which is about 13 kilograms. And it's probably worth, in 2025, it's worth about $21,000. So it's a great fortune. And so we learn later that Micah is a grown man. So we later see that he has a house, he has a son. We see that in Judges 17, verse 15. So it's not the same as, say, a 17-year-old boy taking $10 from his mother's purse. This is a grown man who has weighed up the idea, followed it through, and stolen from his loving and trusting mother the whole nest egg. So he confesses to his mother that he was the one who stole the silver, and now he's returning it. But there is no real sense of shame or apology. There's no admission, really, that he had sort of intention in stealing it. Only that sort of he has it now when he's returning it. Michael doesn't acknowledge the stress and worry that he's caused his mother. There's no empathy. There's really no genuine apology. He seems to be quite flippant, as if to say, you lost the money, but here it is, bye. And so the story is already off to a bad start. And nearly every verse that we're going to study in chapter 17 reveals just another layer of how far Israel has fallen away from God. So then he returns it, and Micah's mum blesses him for it. His mother doesn't condone his behaviour. She doesn't call him out and explain that he's done something wrong. She blesses him for it. And then she gives the money back to him. Verse 3, when he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver, his mother said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make an image overlaid with silver. I will give it back to you. So after he returned the silver and gold to his mother, she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith who used them to make an idol, and it was put in Micah's house. So Micah's mother says that she's going to dedicate the silver to the Lord God, which is confusing because she continues to explain that she's going to use the silver to fashion an idol, and yet God has strictly prohibited the creation of idols. It's as if Micah's mother is rejecting the true God and creating a God who she wants him to be, which is no God at all. Then she takes the silver to the silversmith, and he makes an idol out of it. And this reveals another layer of how deep Israel's sin is. There are people living in Israel who are willing to be commissioned, to be paid to make idols, when God has strictly prohibited the casting and worshipping of such idols. Michael's mother commissioned the manufacture of an idol with the money that was stolen from her, and with the money she gives him, Micah creates this carved image. The Hebrew word for this, for the metal, is the same word used in Exodus 32 verse 4, where it describes the golden calf. And Micah is in direct violation of the Ten Commandments by creating these images. The author of Judges uses this story of how Israel has become idolatrous, just like the surrounding nations, and has forgotten God and his ways. So let's just go on a little bit of a journey of what idols are. So the definition of idolatry is the worship of idols or excessive devotion and reverence to some person or something. An idol is anything that replaces our devotion and reverence to the one true God. An idol is anything that we come to rely on for a blessing or for help, for guidance, in place of wholehearted reliance on the one and only true God. Most prevalent form of idolatry in the Bible seems to be the worship of images that are thought to embody various pagan deities. Modern days idols just look a little bit different, but they include things like identity and sort of maybe our education status, or maybe even we put like a disability badge on us. Money, material things, jobs, our appearance, our phones, technology, romantic relationships, comfort and security, maybe our children or our family, which are so dear to us, but they replace, they're put in a higher priority than God. Maybe our church involvement or our ministry we put up there. So one thing that makes all these idols is that we're looking away from wholehearted reliance on the true God. And we're looking for this idol for special protection or blessing or guidance or help. And we think that this thing's going to give us what really God can give us. An idol is when something or someone becomes more important than God. So just a quiz for yourself. How can I identify modern day idols in my life? So here's 4 questions you might want to ask yourself. Where do I spend my time? Where do I spend my money? Where do I get my joy? And what is always on my mind? And these things might be a little bit of an indicator that we've prioritized something above God. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a few sort of guiding questions to help you. Following idols impacts our relationship with God because we don't fully rely on him for everything that we need. And so it's disobedience and it's fruitless because nothing else can fulfill the way that God fulfills. We were created to be in relationship with God. So if we desire anything else, any other relationship above him, we are not going to find fulfillment in that. Verse 5, now this man Micah had a shrine and he made an ephod and some household gods and installed one of his sons as a priest. So here we see another layer of depravity here. Michael has a silver idol, he makes a shrine for it, then he makes an ephod just like Gideon did in Judges chapter 8, and you can see that video there. And then Micah appoints his son as a priest. So firstly, what is an ephod? An ephod is an elaborate and ornate piece of clothing worn by a priest or even the high priest. It was a ceremonial sort of apron-like garment. It was made of gold and blue and purple scarlet yarn and linen. The ephod was worn over the robe and held in place by the shoulder. It had a girdle, so it was held in place here, and then it had a girdle around the waist. The breastplate, which was part of the ephod, contained the Urim and the Thummim. On top of each of the shoulders of the ephod were fastened 2 onyx stones or little clasps, and sometimes people who weren't high priests wore simple linen ephods, which was the case. You can see this in Samuel, 1 Samuel 2 verse 18, and David, 2 Samuel 6 verse 14, and 1 Chronicles 15 verse 27. The ephods were closely associated with hearing from God and determining his will, since they were directly related to the priesthood. And they were the only ones who were allowed near in the presence of God. And the Urim and Thummim, they were carried inside the breastplate of the priest of Israel, inside his garments. And so this creation of the ephod, it was in direct contradiction to God's law. Micah, he was an Ephraimite, so Micah's son therefore was an Ephraimite too, and Ephraimites were not priests. The Levites, only through Aaron's line, were to be priests, and so this was an outright rejection of God's law and what he prescribed. So it's the Levites who were supposed to be priests. So the role of the Levites, they were the ones, they were from the tribe of Levi, which was one of Jacob's 12 sons. And the role of priests, they were a group of qualified men within the tribe of Levi who had the responsibility over the aspects of the tabernacle and later on temple worship. And all the priests were to be Levites according to the law, but not all Levites were priests. To be a priest, you had to be, one, a Levite, but then you also had to be a descendant from Aaron, so Aaron, the brother of Moses. The Levitical priesthood began with Aaron, the older brother of Moses. Aaron's descendants served as priests in Israel, ministering in the tabernacle and later in the temple, primarily as representation. They represented the people to God. And the Levitical priests bore more responsibility of offering the sacrifices required by the Mosaic law. So we can see a bit of a definition of what the Levites priests were in Chronicles 23 verse 28. The duty of the Levites was to help Aaron's descendants in the service of the temple of the Lord, to be in charge of the courtyards, the side rooms, the purification of all the sacred things, and the performance of other duties in the house of God, that is the tabernacle or the temple. But it is totally unnecessary for Micah to appoint his son as a priest, because the tabernacle at this time was in a place called Shiloh. We can see this later on in Judges 18 verse 31. And Shiloh was in the same area as Micah. It was in Ephraim. It couldn't be any more convenient for Micah. He could have had his sins atoned for and seek the Lord in his own backyard. And yet Micah creates his own religion. It is as if Micah wants to create a religion that is convenient for him. It suits him better than what God has designed himself. Micah is saying, I'm not going to bother with going to the tabernacle. I'm not going to bother going to worship the true and living God in the way that he prescribes. I'm not going to submit myself to God's ordained Levitical priesthood. I'm not going to obey the sacrificial requirements of God's law. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to do what's right in my own eyes, based on my own selfish convenience. So again, we see how far Micah's heart is from following the Lord. Verse 6, in those days Israel had no king, and everybody did as they saw fit. And here we're reminded why Israel keeps spiraling down. Chapter 17 and onwards demonstrates what happens to people who have no king and do what is right in their own eyes. But we should remember that Israel did have a king. God was always their sovereign, and they needed to submit to him and his ways and his leadership. God had been continually gracious to Israel, and now he is leaving them to the natural consequences of their own choices. Israel doesn't accept the king, that is God. They don't accept God as king, and they are doing what is right in their own eyes. And in a way, we're still living in those times. People do what is right in their own eyes. Where morals and views have traditionally and universally been accepted as good and right as defined by God, they're now being considered wrong. And the morals and views that were traditionally and universally accepted as wrong by God and now being considered as right. We see that everywhere in our society. Verse 7, a young Levite from Bethlehem in Judea who has been living within the clan of Judah left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. So this Levite, he's travelling in search of a place to stay. Verse 8, he's looking for a place to stay. Verse 9, and legally, he should not have been homeless because as a Levite, he was assigned a place to stay already. Joshua 21 describes how the tribe of Levite, they didn't receive any territorial inheritance like the other tribes. They received cities and their surrounding pasture lands within the territories of other tribes, as commanded by God through Moses. These cities were allotted to the Levites to provide for them dwelling places and to support the ministry. And each of the clans of Levi were allocated different areas in Israel. So I think there was 3 clans of Israel, and so they had different allocations, different towns, depending on their clan. We know that he was a Levite, but we don't know who his father was. We don't really know what clan he was from, but we can reasonably assume that he was from the clan of the Kohathites. So this is Levi's second son. More specifically, could be from Aaron's line, because he was living in Judah. So you can cross-reference this to Joshua 21 verses 4 to 5 and 9 to 19. Says the first lot came to the Kohathites. According to these clans, the Levites, who were descendants from Aaron, the priests, were allocated 13 towns in the tribe of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. So according to Joshua, if this Levite was from the land of Kohath, and he was living in Judah, he had a choice to live in 13 towns. He had the luxury of choice to live either in Benjamin, Judah, or Simeon. However, none of these towns actually included the town he was in, Bethlehem. He was in Bethlehem, and this was not a Levitical town. Bethlehem was in Judea, but it was not a town that was given to the Levites. It was for the people from the tribe of Judah. So to begin with, he's not even coming from the town or living in the town that he should have been living. He's already compromised, and we'll see later on how he continues to compromise. He's living in Bethlehem. He's in search for another place to stay. And firstly, no Levite needs to actually search for a place to stay. They have their own townships. They have their own pasture land assigned to them. And these towns were to be their homes because they weren't allocated lands or regions for themselves. So why was he searching for a place to stay? Well, we're not told. But what we do know is he is leaving one area allotted to one family, and he is looking for a place to stay in Ephraim, which is allocated sort of to a different part of the family. It's still within the land of the Kohathites, but not those from the line of Aaron. So he appears to be a little bit of a sojourner. Perhaps he's lonely. Lonely not because I think he wants to live a hermit life, because we see that he does actually want to be with people, but I think perhaps he's lonely because the Kohathite Levites have disowned him in a way, maybe because of the type of man he is. He compromises whenever it suits him, and he'll continue to make compromises the more we follow this Levite. Verse 9, Micah asked him, "Where are you from?" He says, "I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judea." He says, "and I'm looking for a place to stay." Then Micah told him, "Live with me and be my father and my priest, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food." So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. And Micah installed the Levite and the young man because his priest, the young man became his priest and lived in his house. So this section here, we can see that Micah takes this Levite into his home as a personal priest. But priests were supposed to serve God in the way that was described by the law, and they ministered at the tabernacle, not for individuals or their homes or their families, but they were to minister for the whole of Israel. The Levites were supposed to serve God in service of Israel and service of all tribes, not just one family, not just one tribe. Micah appears to have an attitude of entitlement. He thinks that he deserves his own personal, private, dedicated priest. Maybe he wants to control the priest for his own benefit. Verse 11 says the Levite agreed to live with him. So the Levite, who should have known the law better, he should have known it better than anyone, he condones and he joins Micah's disobedience instead of condemning it. Verse 13, and Micah said, now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest. So this last verse here, Micah clearly has the wrong thought. He thought he could manipulate God and that God would prosper him. Micah's actions are not based on the teachings of the Word of God. He sought to serve God in a way that he wanted, not the way that God commanded. And this chapter ends on a note where we see how deceived the Israelites have become. They've taken their focus off the one true God and created their own self-pleasing, convenient religion. And God never designed it. He never sanctioned these actions. Even though Micah was sincere, he was misguided. He needed to align his desires with God's commandments. And we learn that we also need to align our beliefs with God and his words. Otherwise, we could be completely sincere about something, but actually be sincerely wrong. So that's all I have for you from Judges chapter 17. It's been a pleasure spending time with you, and I look forward to the next time we meet together. We'll be looking at the Danites in Judges chapter 18. Bye for now.